Picture this. It is a gray dawn off the Carolina coast in late 1717. A merchant captain named Henry Bostock stands frozen on the deck of his small sloop, watching a tall man on a rolling enemy ship perform an act that defies every rule of warfare he has ever known. The stranger is calmly weaving lit hemp fuses into the long black beard that hangs down to his chest. The slow matches hiss and smoke, curling up around his eyes and ears until his entire face is wreathed in a sulphurous yellow cloud. He has not fired a single cannon. He has not drawn his cutlass. He simply stands there at the rail and lets Bostock look at him. We usually picture pirates as drunken brutes swinging axes and screaming for blood, not as men who treat a boarding action like a carefully rehearsed stage performance. But right now Edward Teach, the man the world would soon call Blackbeard, is not preparing to fight. He is preparing to be seen. According to Captain Charles Johnson's General History of the Pirates, published just 6 years after these events, Blackbeard cultivated this terrifying appearance with the precise discipline of an actor rehearsing for a leading role. Henry Bostock surrendered without firing a shot, and historical records suggest that across nearly 2 years of constant raiding, Blackbeard may have never personally killed a single captive in cold blood. How does a man with such a modest body count become the most feared name on the entire Atlantic Ocean? Before we dive into this story of theater, terror, and the most calculated branding campaign of the 18th century, hit the like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are listening from. I find it incredible that we get to explore these forgotten corners of the past together, separated by oceans and centuries, but connected through curiosity. Forget the romantic image of the freeborn rebel sailing into piracy out of love for the open sea. The reality of 1713 was a brutal economic disaster engineered by politicians sitting in marble halls thousands of miles away. The War of the Spanish Succession, called Queen Anne's War in the Colonies, finally ended that year with the Treaty of Utrecht. For more than a decade, the British Crown had armed thousands of skilled sailors and turned them into legal sea raiders called privateers. These men were not criminals. They carried royal commissions called letters of marque that gave them the right to attack French and Spanish merchant ships and keep a percentage of the loot. They were veterans. They were professionals. And when the ink dried on the peace treaty, every single one of them was instantly unemployed. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to learn that your entire industry has been outlawed overnight, that your specialized skills are now considered worthless or criminal, and that the government you served for 10 years has rolled up the gangplank and walked away. That was the reality on the docks of Port Royal, Bristol, and Nassau in 1714. Edward Teach was one of these men. The historical record about his early life is genuinely thin. We believe he was born in Bristol around 1680, that he was unusually literate for a sailor of his class, and that he served honorably aboard a British privateer based in Jamaica during the war. After the peace, he drifted, like thousands of others, toward the lawless free port of New Providence in the Bahamas. This island had become a floating refugee camp for unemployed sea raiders. The harbor at Nassau held more than 1,000 former privateers living in tents made of stolen sailcloth, drinking stolen rum, and slowly starving. The old system had used them and discarded them. Teach learned a brutal lesson watching his fellow veterans drink themselves to death. The rules of legitimate society were not designed to protect men like him. If he wanted to survive, he would have to write his own. Teach did not invent his methods alone. Around 1716, he attached himself as a crewman, and then as a lieutenant, to a remarkable older pirate named Captain Benjamin Hornigold. Hornigold was a former privateer himself, and he ran his ship by a strict set of rules that confused every new recruit who stepped aboard. The first rule was that Hornigold refused to attack British vessels. He would chase a French merchantman across 300 miles of open water, but he would let a British sloop sail by untouched. The second rule was even stranger. Hornigold would not allow his men to murder captured crews. Beat them, strip them, take their cargo, terrify them, yes, but not kill them if it could be avoided. To a new pirate hungry for blood and gold, these rules seemed insane. Why leave witnesses alive? Why leave half the available targets untouched? Hornigold sat young Teach down and explained the counterintuitive economics of their trade. A pirate captain who slaughters his prisoners creates a powerful incentive for every navy in the Atlantic to hunt him to the ends of the earth. A pirate captain who lets his prisoners live, who treats them roughly but releases them with their lives, creates something far more valuable. He creates surrender. The next merchant captain who spots his flag remembers that the men who attacked his cousin last year were rough but not murderous, and he strikes his colors without firing a shot. Mercy, properly weaponized, is more profitable than cruelty. Think of this like a modern hostile corporate takeover where the raider deliberately keeps the existing employees on the payroll. Word spreads. The next target offers no resistance. Teach absorbed this lesson with terrifying intelligence. He saw what Hornigold could not quite see about his own system. Mercy by itself was not the engine. The engine was reputation, and reputation could be engineered far more deliberately than Hornigold had ever attempted. By 1717, the older pirate was clearly being eclipsed by his student. Hornigold's crew began to suspect their captain was going soft, and they pushed for a more aggressive approach. The mutiny came quietly. Hornigold accepted a royal pardon and retired. Teach took command of a small sloop with 6 guns and a hand-picked crew of 70 men. He was now a captain in his own right, but he understood something that Hornigold never had. 6 guns and 70 men would never be enough to build the brand he had in mind. The chance arrived in November 1717 near the island of Martinique. Teach's lookout spotted a heavy French slave ship called La Concorde, returning from the West African coast with a depleted crew weakened by dysentery and scurvy. The vessel was a 200-ton 3-masted square-rigger built for the brutal Atlantic crossing. She was armed with 16 guns and designed to fight off corsairs along the African shore. Teach attacked at dusk with 2 small sloops. The French crew, sick and outnumbered, surrendered after a token resistance. The standard pirate procedure now would have been to loot La Concorde, transfer her cargo, strip her of valuable rigging, and either burn her or release her shell. Teach did something almost no pirate captain in the historical record had ever attempted. He kept her. He spent the following weeks at a hidden anchorage in the Grenadines doing something genuinely radical. He stripped out the slave decks, reinforced the gun ports, and progressively mounted 40 cannons across her broadsides. 40 guns made her more heavily armed than most colonial naval frigates patrolling the Caribbean. He renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge, a pointed political reference to the dead British Queen, whose war had created his generation of unemployed sailors. The name was itself a kind of advertisement. It told every former privateer in the Atlantic that this ship belonged to one of their own. Within weeks, men were sailing across hundreds of miles of open water just to volunteer for his crew. He grew his force to nearly 300 men. Think of this as a startup founder who, instead of fighting for market share with a small product, suddenly builds a flagship platform so dominant that the entire industry has to redefine itself around him. Queen Anne's Revenge was not a pirate ship. She was a floating fortress that could outgun almost anything afloat in the western Atlantic short of a full Royal Navy ship of the line. And Teach was not finished. He understood that the ship by itself was just a tool. The real weapon was the man standing on her quarterdeck. He still had to engineer himself. The transformation of Edward Teach into Blackbeard was the most calculated personal rebrand of the 18th century. Every element was deliberate. He grew his black beard down to the middle of his chest and braided it into long pigtails tied off with colored silk ribbons. He wore 3 pairs of pistols on silk bandoliers crossed over his chest, 6 loaded weapons within reach at any moment. He carried multiple cutlasses, a long dirk, and a heavy cavalry sword. Under the brim of his wide black hat, he tucked lengths of slow-burning hemp match cord, the same fuses used to ignite cannons. Before going into action, he would light the ends of these matches and let them smolder around his face, creating that famous halo of sulphurous yellow smoke. His black flag was a masterpiece of psychological design. According to historical accounts, it depicted a horned skeleton holding an hourglass in one bony hand and a spear piercing a bleeding heart in the other. Every symbol carried a message. The horns marked him as a creature beyond human law. The hourglass said your time is running out. The bleeding heart said resistance ends in agony. Captain Charles Johnson, writing in 1724, described him as a figure who frightened America more than any comet that had appeared in the colonial skies for many years. I find that comparison genuinely striking. Johnson was reaching for the most terrifying natural phenomenon his readers could imagine, the kind of celestial omen people believed predicted plagues and the death of kings, and he was telling them that a single man with a smoking beard had achieved the same psychological effect across an entire continent. The signature move flowed directly from this engineered appearance. Teach never charged a target. He approached slowly, deliberately, giving the enemy crew several minutes to study him through their telescopes. He wanted them to see the smoke. He wanted them to count the pistols. He wanted the captain's nerve to crack before the first grappling hook flew. Historical records of his captures show an astonishing pattern. The overwhelming majority of his prizes surrendered before any meaningful exchange of cannon fire. He won fights by being seen, not by fighting. I think this is the single most underrated insight in the history of asymmetric warfare. He had discovered that perception, properly weaponized, was deadlier than any broadside. The popular image of pirates is a band of drunken outlaws drifting wherever the wind blows them. The historical reality of Blackbeard's operation was almost the opposite. He ran a sophisticated continental intelligence network that would not look out of place inside a modern criminal enterprise. The first node of this network was the lawless port of Nassau itself, a town where every tavern keeper, every harbor pilot, and every prostitute earned extra income passing information to pirate captains. When a merchant ship departed Bristol or Boston bound for the West Indies, its manifest, its cargo, its number of guns, and the experience level of its captain were often known in Nassau before the ship had cleared the English Channel. Teach paid generously for accurate information and brutally punished informants who lied to him. The second node was a network of corrupt colonial officials along the eastern seaboard. Port collectors in the smaller harbors of North Carolina, Virginia, and Pennsylvania quietly accepted bribes to look the other way when suspicious ships unloaded suspicious cargo. The third node was perhaps the most overlooked. Roughly 60 of the 300 men aboard Queen Anne's Revenge were of African descent, including a man named Caesar who would become Blackbeard's most trusted lieutenant. Some had been freed from captured slave ships. Others had escaped plantations and chosen piracy as the only available alternative to bondage. These men could move through colonial harbors, taverns, and markets in ways their white crewmates could not, listening to conversations that white sailors would never have access to. Think of this as a 1717 version of distributed open-source intelligence. The Black Flag was the marketing campaign that filled the headlines. The information network was the actual product that filled the holds. Teach almost never attacked at random. He knew which ship was carrying what, where she was going, how many guns she mounted, and how green her captain was. The Persian-Mongol parallel here is exact. Just as Genghis Khan weaponized the marginalized merchant class to map his enemies, Teach weaponized the marginalized tavern class and the marginalized African class to map his prey. Both men understood that information gathered from people the system ignores is information the system cannot defend against. The fearsome appearance got all the attention. The invisible web did all the work. By the spring of 1718, Teach had built a small flotilla of 4 ships and around 400 men, with Queen Anne's Revenge as his flagship. Most pirate captains in his position would have spent the year picking off isolated merchant vessels along the trade routes. Teach did something almost no pirate had ever attempted. He attacked an entire city. In May 1718, Queen Anne's Revenge and her consorts sailed directly into the mouth of Charleston Harbor, the wealthy capital of the South Carolina colony, and dropped anchor across the main shipping channel. He blockaded one of the most important ports in colonial America for nearly 6 days. He captured every ship that tried to enter or leave the harbor. He seized somewhere between 8 and 9 vessels, including a pilot boat carrying a prominent local councilman named Samuel Wragg, along with his 4-year-old son. The city council met in panic. They expected a ransom demand of tens of thousands of pounds in gold. The demand that arrived was almost surreal. Blackbeard wanted a single chest of medicine, estimated value between 300 and 400 pounds. Why medicine? Historians debate the answer. Some suggest his crew was ravaged by syphilis. Others suggest he simply needed mercury-based treatments common to that era. But the strategic genius of the request goes beyond its contents. By demanding something so modest, so almost embarrassing, he revealed something terrifying to the watching colonies. He could have asked for anything. He chose this. The implicit message was that wealth was not what motivated him. Power was. The Charleston City Council surrendered the medicine within hours. Teach released the hostages, stripped them of their fine clothes for added humiliation, and sailed away. The news traveled up the eastern seaboard within weeks. An entire colonial capital, defended on paper by militia and harbor guns, had been brought to its knees by a single pirate captain demanding a doctor's chest. Newspapers from the Boston News-Letter to the Pennsylvania Gazette carried the story. Insurance rates on every merchant route along the Atlantic seaboard spiked overnight. Captains began refusing to sail without armed escorts. The reputational dividend was staggering. Charleston had not made Blackbeard rich. Charleston had made him immortal. I sometimes try to imagine the conversations in those colonial council chambers afterward. Governors and merchants trying to explain to London how a single bearded man with a smoking face had effectively held an entire province hostage. The official letters from this period read like men trying not to admit they were beaten by a stage performance. What Blackbeard did next is the single most baffling decision of his career, and I think it is the one that proves he was a strategist rather than a madman. Just 1 month after the Charleston triumph, in June 1718, he deliberately destroyed his own masterpiece. Queen Anne's Revenge approached the shallow waters of Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, supposedly for routine maintenance. While crossing a sandbar, she struck bottom and grounded hard. A second ship, attempting to pull her free with cables, somehow also grounded. The official version says it was an accident. Historians and archaeologists who have studied the wreck site since its 1996 discovery have noted that the geography of the inlet, the weather conditions, and the experience of Blackbeard's pilots make a simple accident almost impossible to believe. The grounding was almost certainly deliberate. Look at what happened next. Teach took the treasure, took roughly 40 of his most trusted men, including Caesar and Israel Hands, and abandoned the rest of the crew. Some he marooned on a small, deserted sandbar. Others he simply left to fend for themselves on the mainland. He scattered his organization overnight. Then he sailed quietly into Bath, North Carolina, the modest provincial capital, and presented himself to Governor Charles Eden as a repentant pirate seeking the royal pardon that King George had offered to all pirates who turned themselves in. Eden granted the pardon immediately, with suspicious eagerness. The conventional reading of these events misses what Teach was actually doing. Queen Anne's Revenge had become a problem rather than an asset. She was too famous. Her silhouette could be identified from miles away. Her crew of 300 was impossible to keep secret, impossible to supply, and impossible to control. The Charleston blockade had drawn the personal attention of the British Admiralty in London. Continuing to sail openly in such a recognizable warship would have meant a Royal Navy frigate appearing on the horizon within months. So he shed his skin. He destroyed the ship. He scattered the crew. He pocketed the treasure. He bought himself a pardon. He kept only the men who knew where the gold was buried. Compare this to a corporate raider who deliberately dissolves the famous shell company that made him notorious, walks away with the assets, and reincorporates quietly under a new name. Within weeks, Teach had a small house in Bath, an arrangement with the corrupt Governor Eden, and a deep-water hideout at Ocracoke Inlet where he could still pursue selective piracy under official protection. The myth says he retired. The evidence says he simply downsized into a more sustainable model. Blackbeard had not counted on Alexander Spotswood. The lieutenant governor of the neighboring colony of Virginia was a different kind of man from Charles Eden. He was ambitious, energetic, and possessed of an almost obsessive sense of imperial order. Spotswood read the reports of Teach's continued raiding out of Ocracoke and understood immediately what the rest of the colonial establishment was politely refusing to see. The royal pardon was a fiction. Teach was operating openly with the protection of a sitting royal governor. If this corruption was allowed to stand, every other pirate in the Atlantic would head for North Carolina and demand the same arrangement. Spotswood made a decision in October 1718 that broke nearly every rule of colonial jurisdiction. He had no legal authority to send Virginia forces into North Carolina waters. He did it anyway. He dispatched Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy with 2 small sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, carrying around 60 sailors and Marines. The expedition was paid for partly out of Spotswood's personal funds. The orders were unambiguous. Bring back Blackbeard. Maynard found Teach at anchor inside Ocracoke Inlet on the evening of November 21, 1718. Teach had only 19 men aboard his sloop Adventure that night. Many of his veteran crew were ashore. By all rational measures, he should have run. He did not. According to accounts later recorded from Maynard's own logbook and from the testimony of survivors, Teach drank heavily through the night and waited for dawn. When the 2 Virginia sloops moved into the channel at first light on November 22, he turned to face them. The opening exchange of cannon fire devastated Maynard's smaller sloop, killing or wounding more than 20 men in the first broadside. Teach, watching from his deck, believed he had won. He ordered his men to grapple and board. What he did not know was that Maynard had hidden the surviving members of his crew below decks. As Teach and his boarding party crossed onto the Virginia ship, expecting to find a slaughtered remnant, 14 sailors poured up through the hatches with cutlasses and pistols. The fight on that small deck lasted only minutes, but it is one of the most documented hand-to-hand engagements in maritime history. Teach and Maynard found each other in the press. They fired their pistols at point-blank range. Maynard's shot struck home. Teach's missed. They closed with swords. Maynard's blade snapped against Teach's heavier cutlass. A young Scottish sailor swung a broadsword across Teach's neck from behind, opening a terrible wound but not killing him. According to Maynard's own report, it took 5 pistol balls and roughly 20 separate sword wounds to finally bring Edward Teach down. He died standing, attempting to cock another pistol with hands already slick with his own blood. Below decks on Teach's ship, the loyal crewman Caesar moved toward the powder magazine with a lit match, prepared to blow up the Adventure and everyone aboard as he had been ordered. 2 captured English prisoners tackled him before he could reach the gunpowder. Maynard ordered Teach's head sawn from his body and tied to the bowsprit of his sloop. He sailed back to Virginia with that grim figurehead leading the way. The legend was officially dead. The accounting of Edward Teach's career is genuinely strange when you lay it out on paper. His active period as a pirate captain lasted barely 2 years. The number of confirmed kills attributable to him personally is shockingly low, possibly as low as a handful, perhaps including only the night he died. He never accumulated a vast fortune by the standards of pirates like Henry Avery or Bartholomew Roberts. The treasure he supposedly buried, if it ever existed, has never been found. And yet his name is the one that survived. 3 centuries later, more people can identify Blackbeard than any other figure from the golden age of piracy. The unintentional legacy of his career is even stranger. The terror generated by his blockade of Charleston, combined with the wider pirate wave he inspired, accelerated the growth of an entirely new financial industry. Marine insurance underwriters meeting at Edward Lloyd's Coffee House in London during this exact period began to formalize the system of risk pooling that would eventually become Lloyd's of London. The Royal Navy, embarrassed by Spotswood's freelance operation against Teach, dramatically expanded its anti-piracy patrols across the Caribbean and along the American coast. The golden age of piracy effectively ended within 6 years of Blackbeard's death, partly because the entire imperial machine had been forced to professionalize itself in response to him. He did not destroy the empire. He provoked the empire into upgrading itself. And then there is the mystery. Teach's personal logbook, which contemporaries said he kept meticulously, vanished completely. His treasure, if real, was never recovered. The crewmen who knew where it was buried were either executed at Williamsburg in 1719 or escaped into the back country and disappeared from the record. Queen Anne's Revenge herself slept under the sand of Beaufort Inlet for almost 3 centuries. In 1996, a private salvage company located her wreck under 20 feet of murky North Carolina water, her cannons still loaded, her hull timbers preserved by the silt. Archaeologists have spent the years since pulling artifacts from the seabed, slowly assembling the physical evidence of a man who understood the future of fame 2 centuries before the world had words for it. We naturally want to write Blackbeard off as a violent thug who got lucky. That is a comfortable underestimation. The man who lit fuses in his beard and demanded medicine from a colonial capital had grasped a truth that the modern world has only fully understood with the rise of mass media. An image, designed with care and broadcast with discipline, is a weapon more efficient than any cannon. He killed almost no one. He defeated almost everyone. He was hunted down not because of the bodies he left behind, but because the empire could not tolerate the existence of a man who had proven that fear is a currency you can print at will. When you look at the modern world, our influencers and celebrity criminals, our viral villains and engineered personas, our brands designed to provoke emotion before product, you are looking at the distant smoking echoes of a man standing at a rail off the Carolina coast, weaving lit hemp into his beard, waiting for the merchant captain in his telescope to break first. The most feared pirate in history is buried somewhere off the coast of Virginia without his head. His ship sleeps in the mud of a Carolina inlet. His treasure has dissolved into legend, but the smoke from that beard is still drifting through every screen we look at. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the calculated terror of Blackbeard and Queen Anne's Revenge. If you found this breakdown of theatrical warfare and weaponized reputation fascinating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. I want to hear your thoughts. Was Edward Teach a monster, or the first man to truly understand the power of an engineered image? What historical figure or forgotten empire should we put under the microscope next? Let me know down in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.